Today, we will dive into one of the most disturbing cases in the criminal history of the United Kingdom, the tragic case of Kelly Ann Bates. This shocking crime left not only her family, but an entire nation in shock due to the cruelty and violence involved. Kelly Ann Bates was born in May 1978. She was the daughter of Margaret and Tommy Bates and had two siblings whose names and ages were not disclosed. The entire family lived in the area of Gorton, sometimes referred to as a neighborhood located within the Metropolitan District of Tameside in Manchester, England. Tameside is also home to the ruins of Buckton Castle, one of the earliest stone castles in the northwest of England, built between the 10th and early 12th centuries. According to the most recent data from 2022, the area has just over 232,000 residents, making it the 8th most populous district in Manchester. Kelly was described as a very joyful girl who had a happy childhood with her family. She was an energetic child who loved playing ball with her siblings and friends in the street. She was also highly intelligent, with a maturity that exceeded expectations for her age. People often said Kelly seemed like an adult even when she was very young. Another of her qualities was her natural ability to deal with children. She was patient and attentive. With her independence and strong sense of responsibility, at around 12 years old, Kelly started working as a babysitter for some family friends and neighbors, and she excelled at it. She had the ambition of pursuing a career in early childhood education. In addition to babysitting, Kelly also worked part-time at a local grocery store on weekends. She was considered so mature that she was often seen engaging in conversations with much older people, which was never a problem due to her demeanor. By 1992, when Kelly was 14, those close to her noticed she started behaving differently. She acted oddly and, when questioned, revealed to her parents that she had taken an interest in someone new. Her parents assumed this was normal for someone her age. From the start, Kelly implied that this person she liked was someone from her school, but she didn't provide many details. Over the next 2 years, Kelly's behavior changed even more drastically. She began lying to her parents and distancing herself from friends and family. When she was 15, some sources say 16, Kelly left home, saying she was going for a walk, but didn't return that day. The next morning, her parents called the police to report her missing since she hadn't informed anyone where she would be, which made them extremely concerned. A few hours later, Kelly returned home, acting as if nothing was wrong, and even got angry, saying her parents had no reason to involve the police. She explained her absence by claiming she had stayed at a friend's house named Rachel. However, her parents later found out this was a lie, but they let the situation go. A few months later, in 1994, Kelly's mother came home from work to find her daughter waiting for her in the kitchen with a man. Kelly finally wanted to introduce her boyfriend to the family. She introduced him as Dave Smith. The relationship between Kelly and Dave had actually started 2 years earlier in 1992, when Kelly was 14 and working as a babysitter for some family friends. During that time, she met James Patterson Smith, who was a friend of the family. At some point, James became attracted to Kelly, and they started meeting regularly, quickly forming a relationship. Despite always being close to her parents, Kelly chose to keep the relationship a secret because of the significant age difference. When the relationship began, Kelly was just 14 and James was 45. Kelly was convinced she was in love with him and feared her parents would forbid the relationship due to the age gap. This marked the beginning of Kelly's drastic personality changes, including the night she spent away from home, which was actually the first time she stayed at James' house. When Kelly turned 16, she and James decided to come clean to her parents to gain more freedom, but they were still worried about their reaction. They chose to lie about his age and name, telling her parents that James was Dave and that he was 32 years old. When Margaret, Kelly's mother, saw him for the first time, she was shocked, although she knew Kelly had a preference for older men. Still, she never imagined there would be such a large age difference between them. At the time, Kelly was 16 and James was much older. Margaret admitted she had an unsettling feeling, a chill that ran through her body when she first met James, and something inside her told her to take action against him right then and there. However, given that Kelly had already distanced herself from the family, Margaret chose to stay silent, afraid that confronting her daughter would only push her further away and into James' arms. In the months that followed, Kelly spent more nights at James' house and gradually spent more time there than at her parents' home. However, something troubling started to happen. Every time Kelly returned home, she had bruises, cuts, and injuries. Her parents suspected she was in an abusive relationship and tried everything they could to help her, but Kelly always had an excuse for the marks on her body. Once, she came home with a black eye and explained she had been attacked by a gang of girls on her way home and had only managed to escape thanks to the help of another woman. Deep down, her mother suspected she was lying, but couldn't get Kelly to admit the truth. Eventually, Kelly and James briefly separated, and her parents pleaded with her not to return to him. Unfortunately, it didn't take long for them to reconcile. After they got back together, things only worsened. James became increasingly jealous and controlling, timing Kelly's visits to her parents' house, and berating her if she took longer than expected. The more time passed, the more Kelly returned home covered in bruises, but she continued making excuses. On one occasion, she returned home with a bite mark on her hand that later became infected. When asked who had done it, she stayed silent. Kelly, who had once been so joyful and kind, became a cold, withdrawn girl, constantly fearful. One of the most alarming incidents occurred when Kelly returned home with one side of her face severely swollen, indicating some sort of attack. Her parents, without asking further questions, immediately contacted the police and shared the disturbing pattern of behavior they had observed over the years. Kelly was 17 at the time, but the police officers said no charges could be filed unless Kelly herself gave a statement accusing James. Kelly refused to report James, saying she wanted to spend the rest of her life with him. Not long after, in November 1995, Kelly shocked her parents by deciding to move in with James permanently. Margaret and Tommy begged her to stay, but she was resolute. From that point on, Kelly's contact with her family became even more limited. She could only call her parents once a week, and only with James present to listen to every word. In person, Kelly rarely visited, and when she did, her physical condition deteriorated visibly. She became thinner, paler, and weaker with each passing visit. By March 1996, Kelly had stopped communicating with her parents altogether. One day, Margaret received a Mother's Day card, but she immediately noticed the handwriting wasn't Kelly's. Alarmed, she called the police again and reported the increasingly disturbing signs from her daughter's relationship, but the authorities insisted they couldn't intervene unless Kelly pressed charges against James. Then, on April 16, 1996, James contacted the police to report that Kelly had died in an accident during a heated argument in the bathroom. He claimed to have attempted CPR, but it was unsuccessful. When the authorities arrived, they found a horrifying scene. The house was covered in evidence of brutal and prolonged abuse. Kelly had been tortured for weeks leading up to her death. A forensic report revealed over 150 injuries, with some wounds inflicted weeks before her death. Investigators concluded that, in her final month, Kelly had been held captive, tied to various objects around the house, scalded with hot water, and subjected to unimaginable violence. Some of her injuries included partial scalping and damage to her eyes. Despite everything, the official cause of death was drowning, as James had forced her underwater in a bathtub. During his trial in November 1997, James claimed that Kelly had provoked him, even challenging him to blind her. He also alleged that many of her injuries were self-inflicted. However, the jury deliberated for only 1 hour before finding him guilty of murder. James was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 20 years. Many of the jury members required counseling after being exposed to the disturbing evidence, including photos and videos from the case. Thank you for watching this far. Until next time.